Let me show you how to shake your lemonade. And you don't have to jump on anybody's train. Don't you sweat it when they're throwing you the shade. You can make it. Picky up, sip a cup of tea. Yeah, looking down from where you thought you'd never be. The paparazzi flash cashing on the scene. You can make it. Make it what you want. You can make it what you make it. Make it what you want. You can make it what you can make it. Yeah, open up or else I'm knocking down the door. Gonna make you wonder why you never tried before. You strike a match, start the fire, por favor. You can make it. It might get crazy, but just take it by the horns. Make room for everybody tearing up the floor. Yeah, clap your hands, do the dance, make it yours. You can make it. Make it what you want. You can make it. You can make it what you can make it. Make it what you want. You can make it. You can make it what you can make it. Make it what you want. You can make it. You can make it what you can make it. Make it what you want. Go on. Clap your hands to the
Good afternoon, everybody. At this time, if you'll please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Individuals wishing to address the City Council are requested to complete a speaker card and deliver it to the City Clerk staff prior to the item being heard by the City Council. Please observe a 3-minute time limit for communications, and once called upon to speak, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Communications from the public. This portion of the agenda is intended for general public comment on items within the Council's jurisdiction that are not listed elsewhere on the agenda. Please note that state law prohibits the City Council from discussing or taking action on these items. Please observe a 3-minute time limit for comments, and once called upon to speak, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Ms. Edwards, do we have any speaker cards?
Mayor, we do not have any speaker cards.
Okay, moving on to our first agenda item, which is the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget. Julie Kinnicutt, Budget Manager, will present this item.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget overview. Today, we're going to be talking about an overview of the budget and the process, looking at some special revenue funds, proprietary funds, and the general fund, including Measure X and the general fund forecast. I'm sure you're all very familiar with these strategic goals at this point, but I wanted to include them in the presentation to show that this was the framework used when building the fiscal year budget for next year. This is a representation of the budget process for fiscal year 24. The department started preparing their information in January and February. That information was provided to the finance department in March, and that is when the review and consolidation of the budget information began. Then in April at the Spring Financial Workshop, this was the first time the different segments of the information were presented to you all. The CFD and LMD process was also started in April. The two overlap, so it will change some of the numbers as we work through that process. We are currently at that fourth bend in the road presenting the overview to you today. The CIP information will be presented to the Planning Commission on May 22nd, and then in June, the CIP information will be presented to the Parks and Rec Commission on June 13th. On the 21st, we will bring it to you for adoption, and then on July 1st, the start of the new fiscal year begins. Looking at the revenue estimates for all funds, it's estimated at $438.4 million for next fiscal year. This represents an increase of about $2 million from the information we presented to you at the Spring Financial Workshop. At that time, it was $436.4 million. The primary increase is from three categories: investment earnings, intergovernmental revenues, and internal service charges. My button's not working. There we go. Now looking at the expenditures, the total is $437.3 million for the next fiscal year. That is an increase of $11.2 million from what we showed you at the Spring Financial Workshop. Some items that have been added are a capital improvement project for park playground replacements, the reclassification of 6 firefighters to firefighter paramedic, an additional bucket truck for Public Works, and then the $9.4 million in those service level changes that we went over. And again, some of these numbers might change before we present to you on June 21st as we are working through the CFD and LMD process. Now we will focus on the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are specific revenue sources that are restricted or committed to specific purposes. This is where you will find all of the road-related funds, the special taxing district funds, such as CFDs and LMDs, refuse and recycling, and some other small funds in this group. The three types grouped together make up 90.3% of the activities in the special revenue funds operating budget. The first revenue fund we will look at is the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account, often referred to as the RMRA. These funds are collected from fuel sales at the pump when you are filling up your vehicles. These funds can only be used for capital projects related to roads. For fiscal year 24, the estimated revenues are $3.9 million, which is an increase of 13.9% from where we estimate to end the current fiscal year. For the expenditures, the operating budget is $100,000 and $3.4 million comes from various capital improvement projects related to roads. Next is gas tax, and this is similar to the RMRA fund in how it's collected. However, this one can also be used on capital projects and some operating costs as well. This is a good picture of how the three categories make up the expenditure. If you remember during the Spring Financial Workshop, we explained that the capital improvement program has been revamped. You will now see operating and maintenance projects, or we will refer to them as O&M, as a new category in the expenditures. And these were projects that were historically part of the CIP but are no longer, and so we had to be able to account for them in some way. In fiscal year 24, you can see the revenue at $4.6 million and then the total expenditure of $4.8 million made up of those three different categories. The breakdown here is $2.4 million in operating budget, $600,000 in CIPs, and $1.8 million in O&M. And then anytime you see the expenditure budget over revenues, the existing fund balance is going to be used. Measure A is a 0.5% sales tax that's collected in Riverside County and distributed by RCTC and can be used for capital projects related to roads in the city. You can see the revenue estimates are the same as the current fiscal year. The expenditures, again, are made up of the operating budget, CIP, and O&M projects. There's a reduction in CIP expenses of $1.4 million from the current fiscal year due to the nature of one-time capital project funding. Taking a look at the special taxing districts, this is an aggregate total of all the CFDs and LMDs. There are a total of 43 funds in this group. The revenue is $1.2 million more than the expenditure budget. In this grouping, when a fund collects more revenue than expenses, those resources are added to the operating or capital reserves. There are 3 zones within LMD 84-2 that are the primary drivers of that difference of revenues over expenses, and as reflected in tonight's council agenda items for approval of the engineer's reports. As I mentioned previously, the LMD levy process is occurring simultaneously, so some of these numbers may adjust before the final budget adoption.
Ms. Kennicott?
Yes,
Real quick,
ma'am.
And just as a reminder that this is, we're showing the aggregate of the LMDs, but the LMDs can't, like one LMD that's doing really well can't help another LMD that's doing poorly.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Refuse and recycling is primarily a pass-through for the services with waste management. Transfer from the general fund is initiated when expenditures are higher than revenues. That support is because the general fund receives 100% of the franchise fees. In fiscal year '24, the amount is approximately $200,000, and the difference is primarily from staffing added to support that function. Do we have any questions on special revenue funds?
And I only bring it up, sorry, I should have said this when I talked about the LMD, because we're having the discussion about the LMD that's currently, so some folks might see that slide and be like, hey, we actually have a lot of money. We don't, they're not all the same.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks. Can you go back to slide number 10?
Absolutely.
And just had a question about the road improvement. So we have a difference of $400,000 difference from revenues to operating budget. Is there a reason for that? That we're not, I mean, we certainly have plenty of road projects to do, but is there a reason why we're not using?
So it could be just a timing issue of when we went through with the departments and they allocated their funds out to projects and we got updated revenue estimates. We work with the League of California Cities for that revenue estimate in particular. And so it could just simply be a timing issue. Any excess would actually sit in fund balance, and then the department would bring forward to council when they're ready to utilize and appropriate those funds.
Okay, great. Thank you. That helps.
Good. Next are proprietary funds for enterprise funds. These are programs or activities that are supported by rates and/or fees. We will cover water, reclaimed water, sewer, electric, airport, and transit services. The water utility fund is estimated at $62.7 million in revenue. Primarily, that comes from utility service charges. There are some other items that weigh in on this, such as fees and permits, investment earnings, and current services. There is an estimated total of $67.7 million in expenditures. The difference between revenue and expenses of the $5 million will use the existing fund balance, which is currently $14.3 million. And then as a reminder, the spike you see in fiscal year '23 revenues is for that one-time settlement payment of $19 million. Reclaimed water is estimating $5.3 million in revenue and a combined $4.1 million in expenditures. Looking at the sewer utility fund, the revenue is estimated at $33.5 million with 94.6% of the revenue activity related to utility service charges. Similar to the water utility fund, there are investment earnings, fines, penalties, and forfeitures, current services, and other revenues that contribute to this fund as well. The combined expenditures total $48.7 million, which includes $16.4 million in CIP funding. So let's talk about CIP funding in the budget to better understand why those expenditures exceed the revenue. The capital projects are fully funded now, but most likely won't be fully expensed in fiscal year '24 as these are multi-year projects. Funds are recommended for approval at the beginning of the project to ensure project has allocation to proceed. And in most cases, it will take multiple years to complete the capital projects that are budgeted. So in fiscal year '24, the $15.2 million difference between revenue and expenses will come from the existing fund balance of $34.1 million. Electric utility fund estimates for fiscal year '24 is $17.8 million, and that shows no change over the current year estimates. Since the spring financial workshop, the CIP projects have been incorporated into that expenditure budget. The budget for the airport has not changed from what was presented at the spring financial workshop. The revenues are estimated at $500,000 and expenditures are at $300,000. The operating budget is made up of 71.5% services and supplies and 28.5% in personnel services. Transit services has also not changed from what was presented at the spring financial workshop. The revenues are estimated at $3.4 million and expenditures are at $3.4 million. The operating budget is made up of 94.6% services and supplies and 5.4% in personnel services. Any question on the enterprise funds? Nope. Next, we will talk about the internal service funds, which are funds to account for departments or functions that provide services to other city departments. Warehouse Services has estimates of $500,000 in revenue and $300,000 in the operating budget. 72% of that is of the operating budget is personnel services. 28% is services and supplies. The operating budget has an overall decrease of 18.8% compared to fiscal year 23, and in contractual services costs, the software is now reported under IT. Information technology has revenue estimates of $13.3 million and expenditures of $13.3 million. The expenditure budget is an increase of $400,000 compared to the fiscal year estimate, but due to rounding, it looks like it's the same. Fleet operations has estimated revenue of $5.4 million and expenditures of $5.5 million. The difference of the $100,000 will come from the existing fund balance. The current fund balance is $1.8 million, but these numbers do not include the fiscal year 24 replacement list that will come before you as an errata item when that budget is submitted for adoption in June. Workers' compensation accounts for claims related to work-related injuries and has estimates of $2.6 million in revenue and $3 million in the operating budget. You may notice that expenditures exceed revenues in this fund with the exception of fiscal year 2020. This picture only reflects each individual year revenue and expense and does not include the fund balance we maintain for workers' compensation losses. The difference of $400,000 between revenue expenses and fiscal year 24 will come from the existing fund balance. Liability risk retention accounts for claims against the city but are non-work related. These are estimates of $5.7 million in revenue and $4.3 million in the operating budget. And based on the fund balance needs for this activity and maintaining through fund balance for estimated claims. That is it for the internal service funds, unless anybody has any questions. Okay. Moving on to general fund. We are taking a look at the 5 largest categories that are in the general fund. Those 5 are sales tax, property taxes, other taxes, current services, and other revenues. Sales tax is about 46.2% of the general fund revenues, and property tax is about 28.8%. Just these 2 alone account for 75% of the general fund revenues, and then all 5 make up 92%. For next year, the total inflows, which is a combination of both revenues and transfers in, is estimated to be $213.6 million. That is an increase of $2.8 million when compared to the current fiscal year. I'm sure everybody's eye is drawn to fiscal year 2022 actuals, and that spike is due to those pension obligation bonds that we issued and how the city had to account for the bond proceeds. This will skew all of our comparisons for a couple more years until that fiscal year 2022 falls off in the fiscal year 2027 budget process. Here we have a year-over-year comparison where we are estimating to end fiscal year 2023 and then the estimated fiscal year 2024 and those variances and comments related to each. The proposed general fund expenditure budget is $201.7 million. This represents an increase of about $14.4 million from the information we presented at the spring financial workshop, now that the CIP, O&M projects, and service level changes have been incorporated. This is just a different snapshot of the general fund expenditure budget. It shows expenditures by department and expenditure type. As you can see, personnel is the largest portion and materials and supplies is the second largest portion of the general fund expenditure budget. And then you'll see that the CIP and the O&M projects are both broken out on this slide as well. Total funding in Measure X for fiscal year '24 is $33.5 million and $10.9 million in reserves. This is a snapshot of the fiscal year '24 activity only. The two largest allocation categories are public safety and parks and recreation. Of the $10.9 million in reserves, $4.9 million is in the Parks and Recreation Reserve in preparation of the completion of the master plans currently underway. This is a cumulative look at the Measure X funding for fiscal year '22. The information is based on actuals. For fiscal years '23 and '24, they are estimates based on the current revenue projections and departments spending 100% of their Measure X funds. At the end of the fiscal year, unspent operating funds will add to the reserves. Project funding will roll forward to the next fiscal year. With all the service changes and projects included, this is the snapshot that shows the breakdown of the recurring and one-time funding as well as Measure X reserves. We have recurring at 55%, one-time at 20%, and then the reserves holding at 25%. Here's a look at the general fund forecast based on the previous information I've discussed. Inflows over outflows show a positive amount of $11.9 million. There are some adjustments for funds that will go to and from reserves, including $10.9 million into the Measure X reserves, leaving an estimated positive balance of just under $1 million. Included with this forecast are the next 4 fiscal years with estimated revenues and expenditures based on the information we have available at this time. Any questions on general fund?
Just had a quick, can you go back to slide number 40? This is a great slide. One of the things that was put forward as part of Measure X is where the money was going to go, and this clearly shows what our priorities were for what was said, which is public safety, park and recreation, and retiring our debt service and homelessness. These are all the things that we've talked about. Infrastructure investments. This is where things should go, and this is a great slide. I'll be clipping it and sharing it because it really does show where we've invested versus what we said we were going to invest in too. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, budget overview summary. To close out the presentation, this slide provides the total breakdown of the revenue estimates of $438.4 million for fiscal year '24. And this one represents the expenditure budget for fiscal year '24 at $437.3 million. Up next, the CIP information will go to Planning and Parks and Recreation Commissions on May 22nd and June 13th, and then it will be brought before you on June 21st for the budget adoption. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Kennicott. You certainly put the fun in funds.
He's been working on that one all day.
And I do appreciate it.
I wrote it down. I'll be here all night. Thank you. Ms. Edwards, do we have any speaker cards from the public?
Mayor, no, we do not.
Okay. Do my colleagues have any comments?
Just one real quick. Sorry, I jumped in. He looked right at me.
Turn, girl.
The June 21st, there's gonna be a presentation again, right? It'll just be like the third and final.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful, thank you.
You done? No, I just wanted to thank you, Jacob, just for not overcommitting too much of the Measure X funds too quick to reoccurring funds. It looks like we're taking a real nice cautious approach, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Appreciate it. Glad that you guys are in charge of that and not me. Moving on to our second agenda item, which is the branding update. Sean Hull, Chief Communications Officer, and Cindy Solis, Public Information Officer, will present this item.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This presentation might not be as fun as the funds presentation, but I do see that it's Mayor rebranded his hair over there. It looks pretty good. Looks cleaner, more contemporary, like our new brand. Yeah, so, do we have the click? Push this one. Yeah, use the box. It's not over here. Oh, there it is.
Stand by.
Stand by. Cool. So thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving us the time to give you our branding update. Again, I'm Sean Hull, Chief Communications Officer, and with me is Cindy Solis, our Public Information Officer, to do this presentation. And we're super excited about this. I don't think there's any interest in it. Probably no. It seems like this one is anticipated, so we'll get right to it. We have two asks today. One is we have a strong brand that you've already seen, and we'd like to start implementing that. So we're going to go through that first and just ask if your blessing to start implementing the brand, which is everything besides the seal. And then also we think we have a strong city seal direction, and we are asking for just feedback, general feedback for that. So we'll move forward. And I'll pass it to Cindy to talk about our community engagement process for the branding and the seal design.
Thanks, Sean. Well, first of all, we're so excited to be here again. It's been a long time. So last July, we kicked off our city's rebranding efforts, and we decided to go straight to the source, the heart of our community. And we heard from over 2,200 participants across 12 different environments. And these ranged from focus groups, extensive interviews, workshops, and even pop-ups at summer concerts and farmers market. We heard from new residents, lifelong residents, community leaders, our youth, staff, and even you. So thank you so much for being a part of that community engagement process. Okay, so in February, we presented to you a brand identity system based off of what we heard from our community. So again, today our ask is just that you authorize staff. We're ready to start rolling it out, which would of course start with a digital implementation of our city brand. Today we're just asking that you authorize staff to begin rolling this out. Again, the brand will just be the logo, our colors, our fonts, and our typeface, not our city seal. Okay, so some of these slides may look familiar, so we're gonna zoom right through them, but they really are also just for the benefit of anyone that may be watching this for the first time or that may be in the audience today. So how we got here. Here's a circle, which represents the strength of our community and Grand Circle Boulevard, as well as the Circle City. The pathway to the circle represents our openness to diverse residents and visitors, old and new. The forward outlook represents the bright future ahead for Corona. And the crown represents our defining attitude of honor. It also represents the beautiful mountains that surround our beautiful city of Corona. And when you take all of those elements together, you see a visual story start to unfold. So this is our city logo. This here is our word mark that really reflects all the key attributes that were highlighted through our community engagement. And we'll walk through what all of those were. Yes, our logo. And so the first key thing we wanted to know, the crown, of course. It's a key motif for the city. It represents the meaning of our city. Corona in Spanish means crown. We also have the color reflective of our citrus industry. And the fonts are reminiscent of our Hispanic heritage. The mountains shown here as well on the crown show Corona's unique mountain landscapes. And then the circle, again, Grand Circle Boulevard and the city of Corona known as the Circle City. So here we have a couple different options for the logo. So they're all just different treatments. The one on the left is our word mark. The one on our right is our logo mark. When you combine those two together, you just have an alternate version used for different application purposes. And the key note thing to note here is that the one on the left, which is our word mark, will be the primary use that we use, particularly when we begin rolling this out, at least until we start to get brand recognition, right? And moving on again, so this is our city brand color palette, again reflective of our citrus industry. We have Opportunity Yellow, Sunkist Orange, Forest Green. Sorry, go back one slide. It's okay. Okay, so our primary typeface here is Domain Display. And if you see like the corners of the font, you'll see that there is something inspired by the organic leaves as well as our Hispanic heritage. And we paired this font with something that's cleaner and more neutral just to balance that personality out. The secondary typeface is called Sarah Pro, and there's many ways for us to play with once we begin rolling this out. Here you'll see our tagline, "You belong here." Our research revealed by talking to our community members that Corona is really a city that welcomes you. This tagline really shines a light on how the community embraces each other, providing everyone a safe place to thrive, whether it's through family, nonprofit, faith-based, sport, or even entrepreneurial opportunities. And the next slides here are really where we start to get creative and how you'll see the brand be implemented possibly throughout the city. These are just some inspirational designs. So we'll zoom right through them. The first one, of course, is a billboard welcoming us into the city. We have some murals here shown throughout the city: live, work, explore, you belong here. We even have some park signage of how it could be implemented. Our city staff can wear the brand. We all love Moses. And then, of course, we have some different alternate versions of how it can be used out in the streets and in the real world. Here, the logo embraces our community. It really hugs them and welcomes them. And the next slide, we have how it might look on a magazine or recreation brochure cover, maybe. And then here we have how we'll implement it through digital animation. So we brought those graphics to life in a visual storytelling. And of course, you can't forget swag, whether it's a hat, a bag, or maybe even tattoos. We also took that crown from our City of Corona brand and really allowed our community members to wear that crown. Again, it's a representation of honor. Our community is a community that supports one another. We all have a role to play, and we're all important in the community. Next, we have just a visual representation of what it might look like on a mural on the side of a city building. And now I'll hand it back over to Sean.
Yeah. So now that you've been reoriented with the brand, which I think looks pretty good, we'll just give you a quick update on where we're at and why we want to start implementing it. So we've developed our brand guidelines, which is like the rule book for the brand, so that we know how to use it and we use it properly. We've developed a lot of templates, graphic assets, and so we're ready to go, as long as you are. So with that, we'll just reintroduce the ask, and we ask your blessing to roll out the brand and start using it, and that's everything except the seal.
Thank you, Sean and Cindy, for the refresher. I'll start with my colleagues. Wes?
I like it. I'm happy to go forward. I think this is a great opportunity. I love the interactions with people. I like the crown part. It's great. Good job.
Yeah, I liked it the first time I saw it, and I still like it, so let's do it.
Yep.
I like it more now than I did then. It's grown on me more, and I really like it.
Well, it looks like it's 5 unanimous yeses, so let's start seeing it.
Thank you. And on to what everyone was waiting for. City seal. Yeah, I got it. That's okay. So now we have our second ask. We have a draft city seal. We think we have a strong direction, and it was informed by a long community engagement process. And we took all the feedback and all the motifs, all the imagery, everything that they commented, and we tried to put it into a cohesive seal that didn't feel disjointed, didn't feel like the direction was it was unified. And so we will move and start to show that. So first we'll give a little history of our seals, our old seals. We've had kind of two. You see, in 1962, we had one that was like that 60s Jetson style. It's pretty interesting, but cool. And then in 1986, we approved the use of what is basically our current seal, but it wasn't officially adopted until 1991. And then in 2015, we just made a minor update. We changed the date from being incorporated, and now it's established May 4th, 1886, because we really wanted our birthday to be on May the 4th be with you. That was very important to us. So, yeah. And so we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a seal and a logo, because before we didn't have a logo or a brand, we've just always used a seal, so why do we even need the logo or brand, right? But really they're used for two different purposes. And a city seal is really more official. It's to certify things. It has a little more authority. And when a logo and a brand is really more about promotion, identification, personality, and being inspirational. And in design, a city seal tends to be more nostalgic, leans on historic visuals, can be more scenic and more grounded in realism. And then the design of a logo is more aspirational, metaphoric, has more personality, can be more fun, but also more aspirational in nature. So we have historic and then aspirational. And then you look at the application: seals, bills, certificates, letterhead, proclamations, city agendas, and then logos and the brand is all the fun stuff, all the promotional stuff, and any tattoos that the mayor would like to get. So. And then here you can see a seal on the left, official, and on the right, some swag that's fun, bright, aspirational, fun. I said fun a bunch. And we'll move it over to Cindy for community engagement.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so as I mentioned, when we first kicked off this project, community engagement was going to be really important to us. So we heard from over 2,200 community members, and when we launched the community survey, one of the key questions that we asked is we wanted to be really specific and give the community ample opportunity and chance to share what they thought specifically about our current city seal. Some of those sound bites that we got were, it feels like we just kind of threw everything in there. Maybe the art could be updated. I love the tie into history, but it's too complicated. You can incorporate our history in a more simplistic form. We did a little word cloud here showing some of those keywords that were the most mentioned when we asked our community about the city seal. And you'll notice that the overwhelming feedback we received was, why an orange? Followed by, we love the crown. But in short, the feedback was really mixed. Some people really loved the city seal history, but the majority felt that it was very busy. So here we have a pull quote. A community member said, I like it, but I feel like the abundance of text and other symbols on the seal makes it too crowded and slightly outdated. So you'll see shortly the draft city seal, but I'll kick it over to Sean, who will walk us through all those key motifs that were highlighted in the community engagement process.
Yeah, so we'll just talk about kind of the different motifs and metaphors and imagery, symbolism that's in the seal. Again, it's pulled similar to what's in the brand. And I don't think these should be a surprise to anyone. These are the defining characteristics of our city. And so we start with our lemon, our citrus industry, which the big thing was, why do we have an orange? We should have a lemon because we were the lemon capital of the world. And we didn't just like consider lemon, we looked at imagery from the labels, from artwork, from murals, old photographs, to try to use lemon imagery that's similar to what was used in our history. The second one, which is actually new, this wasn't incorporated into the old seal, which is kind of cool because this is a key prominent thing about our city. Not every city interfaces with wildland. Not every city is bordered with the Cleveland National Forest. And there's aspirations to be cities of trails. We're building out our trail system. So it's really important. A lot of the communities said we should incorporate the Cleveland National Forest in our trail system. The circle, that's an obvious one, right? We have that big image of Grand Boulevard there, and there's a lot of those aerials in our heritage room and a lot of photographs that I've seen. So that was a key element that we wanted to incorporate. Obviously, citrus is circular. Crown, corona means crown, that's a circle. And then also a nod to those who were here before the city was even founded, the band of Gabrino Indians, excuse me for the pronunciation. But circles are big for their community. They have a medicine wheel that's important. Whenever they gathered in a circle because it was unifying and everyone was on an even playing field when they talked. There's no hierarchy. And so circles are important there. So we think that's a beautiful symbol of unity and how we are welcoming too. Then the crown, that's an obvious one as well. Corona means crown in Spanish. And so we pulled some imagery from, again, old citrus labels that use crown. But also the crown is more as family. We should honor each other. And crowns are royalty. There's honor in there. So there's more than just the image of the crown. There's a meaning behind it. And then our typeface. So we want to draw from historical typefaces. We just want to make one up. We looked at a lot of typefaces that were on architecture, like our old Spanish-style architecture. On citrus labels, we went with a serif font, which is has curves and is a little more fun. And then the secondary font also, that is sans serif, came from citrus labels as well. Well, inspired by, yeah. So, and then lastly, we didn't want the seal to be disjointed from the brand. We wanted them to work in unison so that when we were creating imagery or collateral that had to use both, it wouldn't feel like they clashed. So the city seal also uses visual elements, colors, fonts from the brand identity system. And with that, we'll go through a little animation to kind of show the process and some of the stuff we just talked about. So we got the circle highlighted, comes in, lemons pulling and going down to the bottom to border. We pulled typeface from citrus labels, the crown and the mountains interact, and then hidden in there is our logo. And that pulls out, and then you can see it, which I think that's a really cool, unique design element, is having the logo hidden in there. And then you can see the design process. We had a lot of iterations of design, kind of looking like just throwing the lemon, but the big thing we heard was it should be not just a collage, it should be more scenic and more grounded in realism. So we try to make it feel like that. We started designing from that aerial of the circle, and then that was kind of the centerpiece. Obviously the lemons, we built in the mountains. We wanted the crown to be incorporated in not a disjointed way, so the crown actually is the mountains as well, so that has two meanings behind it. And then a lot of different color variations. And then now you can see how it compares with a lot of other seals that may feel, I don't know, maybe dated and disjointed and kind of all over the place. So I do feel that our seal, the proposed seal, is cleaner, it's tied together, it's unified. And we'll just sit there for a second. Cool. All right. And then we'll move on. So what we just talked about, again, all those same motifs and imagery that are incorporated. So there's a lot of thought that went into this. And working all these different images in a unified way was a challenge. It was. And but we like where we ended up. And I'll pass it to Cindy to talk a little bit again about that design process that you saw in the animation.
Yeah, so you saw some of those animations in the video, but we kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of just have it in front of you. Obviously, as from the very left-hand side, the initial concept we began with was just to start laying out those elements that the community highlighted were important, honoring our rich lemon history, drawing inspiration from the mountains, continuing the tradition of the circle. And before we moved on to colors, fonts, or anything, we really wanted to make sure we had a strong sketch and foundation to build upon. So during the sketching process, we did a lot of testing. We wanted to ensure that it was practical. We tested it for small and large sizes, from a small lapel pin to a really large application, right? We wanted to make sure that how much detail is too much detail. We wanted to test the width of the lines, the streets shown on the city seal. We also asked ourselves, how do we optimize it for when we go to print, right? The more complex it is, the more challenge it can become to print. And finally, we even considered the hierarchy of the elements. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that we have a really large lemon, almost similar to our old seal where we had a really large orange, but then it felt a little disjointed, kind of thrown together. So we really try to bridge the community feedback that we received while also having a good, strong, story-centric visual. So you'll see here the city seal again, and we just want to show you some of those alternate colors. So here's what the recommended primary city seal would be. The next is we have that yellow band on the side would be a secondary option depending on the application and printing. And then finally, of course, we'll always have a black and white option in case of different applications. And here you'll see them all side by side, from left to right, primary, secondary, and an alternate version. We also wanted to present two different options for council to consider. Here you'll see that the circle is in an alabaster color, which is from our brand identity. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what we're calling a vintage option. Essentially, it's just a lighter color of that yellow band that goes all the way around the seal. And then here you'll see them all side by side. But again, like Sean mentioned, is the city seal really needed to be, unified with our city brand. So the next two slides show you what those two would look like in combination with our word mark and logo mark. This is the alabaster, and the next one is the vintage option. I'll let you sit on that for a second. And then, the next slide here is we have a comparison. We really wanted to make sure that we tested the city seal for uniqueness to our neighboring agencies, making sure that it was different and unique, that represented Corona in a good light. And even though it has a historical story about where the city came from, it also has a modern aesthetic and design. And here we just wanted to show you what it might look like out in the wild. Here's a mock-up of what it would look like on a truck. And then next we have, like Sean mentioned, city seals are meant more for official purposes. So we have here a city seal that would be shown as a lapel pin and a podium on the right-hand side. So just as a refresher, on our left-hand side, we have our city logo, which you just authorized for us to use. Yay. So city logos are more promotional, while our city seal on the right-hand side will be used more for official purposes. Our logo will be more vision forward and shows our personality, while the city seal is meant more to honor our heritage and also is more scenic. Our logo is more symbolic, while the seal is more strong and has more weight to it. So with that, that was a strong draft that we believe that we have based on community engagement that we heard, all the key motifs that our community highlighted were important to them. So today we just ask you that you share your comments, suggestions, and any feedback that you may have for us.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Before I go to my colleagues, who I know have lots of opinions, I'd like to see, Ms. Edwards, are there any speaker cards?
Mayor, yes, I have 2 speaker cards for this item.
Okay, please come on down.
Paxton, District 1. I like the improvements, very much so. For me, I never really understood why we had the orange. People usually see an orange and think of Florida, so that always confused me. I really like to see the lemon. My question becomes is what is the target audience? Is it just those in Corona or out of Corona? Because looking at that, to me, the 3 things that stand out to me as far as Corona, we have the Circle City, we have the lemon, and the third thing that's really important to me for everybody else outside of Corona is that we have the crown. And for the likes of me, I keep staring at those mountains and I still really don't see the crown as being prominent. So somehow, if there's some way you can work it in to make, a lot of cities have mountains, but they don't have the name of the crown in them. So to me, I'd like to see that a whole lot more prominent. Just my personal opinion, but definitely much better than what we used to have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don Fuller, I'm a resident. On those comments where somebody was complaining about a multiplicity of typefaces and that it looked amateurish, that was me. So you know where that came from. And I've had a little bit of design label background and stuff like that, but I'm not a professional at it. So I had a whole lot of comments, but it doesn't really matter. I like these people, and They worked hard at it, so good for them. And it's on the way. All 5 of you already are in love with it. I had some comments, but they're pretty much meaningless. I would. One little suggestion was, instead of the thing of established with the date at the bottom, I would put Circle City, because there's no mention of Circle City, and you have to sort of figure out the symbolism of the stuff, and it turns over at 90 degrees, and the mountains aren't the same shape as what we have. So that's a little thing, you know. The one other thing I had was the colors. And for reference, see, I'm trying to do a little show and tell. For reference, this is the color of a lemon, and that's not the color of the lemons that are on the seal thing. So it's just, you know, the stuff we have there is kind of like a half orange, half lemon picture you have up there, which is kind of fairly close to Donald Trump's phony spray tan that he uses. It's kind of close to that color. So anyway, this is a lemon. You can pick whatever you want to use out of that. But I think it's all wonderful. I love both of you. Maybe one of you more than the other. And thanks for all your effort you put in and so forth. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No additional speaker cards?
Mayor, no, I do not have any more cards.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with Councilmember Speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I struggled with this because first of all, I'm going to play a little bit of a Councilmember Steiner card and say that I'm colorblind. So I originally thought the green was black. So until someone pointed out to me that it was green, I went, oh, it is? And not that's any criticism, because it's just me. I struggled with the circle, just because it unless you knew what you were looking at, you wouldn't know it. So it looks like a bullseye. So my thought was, even though people hate it, the squiggle that makes up the mall is something that's identifiable, and it would maybe ask either the person that didn't know would know that was symbolizing something. And I too struggled with the mountains and the crown. I see the crown. I don't have any of that portion, but I literally stood at the intersection of Ontario or Upper and Main Street and stared at the mountains, trying to match up. And I know it's not there, and it's not quite the same. But I get the symbolism, and I get how it goes back. And like I said, I wanted to see change. And I hadn't thought about the Circle City part. That might be something that kind of draws back to also to help kind of highlight that. I don't know how you put it in there, but it's kind of my 3 things I wanted to talk about. That's it. Thanks.
Councilmember Steiner?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as Maddie with the crown. Somehow trying to incorporate the crown from the brand into a picture of the mountains, I think that's probably doable. I'm not sure if you're following what I'm getting at, but you might be able to incorporate both into one picture where you can clearly identify a crown of some sort. Maybe not that crown that's in the brand, but a crown of some sort. When I first looked at the logo, the initial one, I was kind of underwhelmed at first. Looking at some of these options, I'm liking things a little bit better, but I definitely think we need some sort of a crown in there. The mountains itself just look like the Alps, which is not our backyard. And if you want to kind of go along the trails theme, then you have rolling hills with obvious areas that are trails. But I know we're in a tight spot here with doing all these things. The circle, I'm a little bit with Wes on that one too. I don't know if, again, if it's big enough to drop a little race car in there, then everybody would kind of get the relationship between the history and what the circle's about. Because right now, you're right, it's just a circle and no one knows what that means. I like the secondary picture on page 54. 4, which was yellow instead of green. And I also liked, oh no, there's a few different things to talk about here, brother.
Well, yeah, but
Let's
you
see.
have a comment on color? What?
Well, yeah, every once in a while I can see the right color. On slide 61, I think it's the vintage green one, where you got the yellow circle. I like the yellow there in the circle better, but again, I still think this needs a little bit of tweaking. I don't think we're that far off. I just think we need to tweak it to make it a little bit more nice instead of underwhelming. So that's all.
Councilmember?
So I really love it. And I thought it was just chock full of like Easter eggs, which I thought just shows, you know, not necessarily Easter eggs, just like shows the thoughtfulness behind all of it. I do think though that those aren't our mountains. They're not our mountains. And so I would like to see a tweak to see our hills look more like our hills, and maybe a crown incorporated within those hills, maybe an outline, or maybe it's the trails that make the crown in the hills. Something that, you know, can, and maybe there's a little bit of a slight color change. And then I think the C, the only reason why everyone's having trouble seeing the C is because we haven't launched the brand yet. I think once we start using the brand and you start seeing the C everywhere, it becomes so much easier to see the C in the seal. It also might be because of the outline of the circle cuts into the C, and you don't see the top and the bottom, so it doesn't look like the letter C. And I don't know if there's any, you know, more work there, but in general, I think this is headed in a great direction. Keeping the colors consistent with the brand, giving different options for the seal with, you know, the vintage colors, the alabaster colors, the black and white. I think it lends itself to diverse uses in an official capacity. I also think it's about time that we have a lemon on our seal instead of an orange. And listen, I like that the old seal was made by a Coronan. I think that was really special. And it served a purpose. It was definitely all the elements, but just kind of all the elements put together. So it's elevating, I think, the city to where we're trying to go. We're stepping up our game in everything, and we're doing it at the same time. This isn't the only focus, right? We're kicking it and getting names for, you know, parks, for public safety, for, you know, our trails, our downtown. Like we're stepping it up everywhere. So I'm glad that this is coming out at the same time. So yeah, I think the branding, once the C comes out. So those are the only tweaks. The mountain is the only one that I genuinely have actual heartburn over, but the rest I think is fantastic. Good work.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I stand with all you guys on the mountains. They need to be softened. Well, let me back up. I know you two back there are probably the designer people watching this thing, and oh, you're not? Oh, never mind.
Welcome.
The designer.
No, they won't be called out anymore. It's fine. You're good.
I hope you're here at 6:30. Tony, I'll be here all night. So for the designer people watching at home, I hope they're watching at home, I really love the genius that goes into this, and how it's not just someone sitting down to think and write and draw, but there's symbolism in it, and there's thought, and there's rhythm, and they did pull the community, and they are trying to design what the community wants. And I really applaud the rhythm and method that was used to get us to where we are. The mountains, they're just not, Jackie's right, they're not our mountains. And so I think the original intent was to make them look like a crown, and I think we can just back off that a little bit. And for the record, the circle is the crown. It's always been the crown. The crown's there. Anyone that says it's not doesn't know Corona. The crown is the circle, so you don't need to worry about the mountains being the crown. There's I don't know what page it is, but can you circle backwards, there's a drawing, an old drawing from the 30s that you guys use. Oh, go back, go forward. Right there. If you look at that where it says Circle Grand Boulevard, that's a painting that was done in the 30s. And it was done by the Corona High School art teacher, Mr. Mullins. And if you zoom in on it, I think that's your filler for the circle. There's a red roof in it. Yep, right there. You can see the. Oh. All right, I'll yield. So there's a red roof in it where it shows the theater. There's the old downtown. I see why Wes wants to put a curve in it, but if you could use this, I would take the curve out. I'm with Jim. A race car or two could be really cool. You guys decide, or ask those two people in the back. Yeah, I really like this picture right here because it paints what Corona was. This painting was done for the 50-year anniversary of Corona. And it was genuine then, it's genuine now. And the only other thing I would eliminate, and again, I see the genius of the pathway going to the circle, but I don't think I would distinguish that pathway. I would just make the surrounding color the same as all the perimeter surrounding color. And with that, that's my comments.
So we've given you absolutely no consensus.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys listen to me, you should know where to go.
So I think we are all appreciative of the effort to get here. And I do agree with you. I think you are going in the right direction. I had a couple comments. If you could go to slide 50, please. No, it was the one with the 4 drawings, that one. So the second one from the left, I think is a better representation of our mountains. I kind of liked that one, and then it started to get a little, more detailed, but I really like that as a the starting point, especially for the mountains. The comments that I had, I also did not like the pathway leading to the circle, mostly because it's an upside down C, or the C is upside down from our logo. I like the message behind it, but I'm not a big fan of the pathway. And I also think that one of the misses is the elimination of the Circle City. So I like the colors, I like the font, I like that lemons are represented, I like the circles are represented. I'm not sure how you put a crown in there artistically or thoughtfully. I don't think the mountains are a good representation of the crown, especially because our mountains are unique and distinct. And when they come off as a crown, they don't really represent the backdrop that is the Cleveland National Forest. So those were the comments that I had written down. But specifically in this slide, the second one from the left, I think is a better representation of our scenic backdrop. So those are my comments.
Mayor, real quick?
Yeah.
Just to give you something to think about, when you drive into Corona and you're looking southwest at the Skyline area, Main Street area, you see some very distinct trails usually. You see Main Street, you see Skin Suit, you see Skyline, and they do jump out at you, because when you're driving southbound on the 15 coming into Corona, you're like, wow, I wonder what that meadow is next to that trail. You can see it, and it really is very identifiable. So maybe if you do end up reworking the mountains, you kind of consider that.
Especially Skyline.
And when we looked at, back a million years ago, we were kind of protesting some of the stuff that Edison wanted to do. They wanted to string some lines across the 15, and we were looking at visual resource analysis, kind of using some stuff that the BLM does on how you analyze how physical structures impact, other things. And there was a spot that's on the 15 just before Magnolia, and you kind of look up at the hills, it's an amazing shot. And it's that just, you see real definition from, where the mountains, end. I don't know if you could actually see skyline, but you see trails, you see some definition to it. And I wish I was trying to find it on my computer, but it's loading, it's updating. I'll see if I can find it, but I thought it was a really visually stimulating picture, just because it shows kind of what we were talking about.
So clear as mud, I'm assuming. Lots of feedback, probably more than you were looking for, but I think you guys are at least moving in the right direction, and we're leaps and bounds from where we were. So,
Well, do you want to clarify some things?
Yeah, I was just going to say, first of all, thank you for the feedback. It is appreciated. These things are always a tricky business, and we knew that going into it, and yet we're doing it. And I think we would, from our end, say that we think we are on the right track. The consensus, the number one thing that I think we've heard is work on the mountains in particular. There's lots of other feedback in there, but particularly the consensus is that we need to rework those mountains. Is there any other consensus feedback in particular, or if we work on the mountains, are we getting there?
What about adding Circle City or something that helps find that circle a little bit better? Whether it's the squiggle or it's the name.
I think that in keeping a tally, I think a couple of us didn't like the pathway. I think the mountains, obviously, I heard that there was an absence of a crown to kind of denote the city, and also the Circle City. And I think Wes's opinion on color doesn't matter.
It's true.
But
Really admit that.
I think Jim, you were not too great with the color. Is that correct?
But it's consistent. It's consistent with the brand, guys.
I just like the yellow a little bit better because it's lemons.
You could use
Yeah.
both.
You can use it. They're not saying you can't use it, right?
Yep,
You
that
can
is
use all
one
those
of
colors.
we have that as a secondary as well. So both of those can be used depending on the application.
And I think the brand, the issue is that we don't see it as the C because we're not yet like seeing the C all over town. So I wonder if there's like a narrowing of the outline or some way to make that C a little more
I
prominent.
100% agree with Councilmember Casillas. I think it's clever when you know what it is.
Know what it is.
So I'd like to see it kind of stay, especially the one that's kind of nostalgic. I think it calls it out. I mean, because it really shows a C. I'm okay with that. I think she's right. I think once you see it more.
Maybe the dimensions, maybe it tilts a little, I'm not sure. But if you can make that C look like the brand, then you see the connection and the pathway is less of a. There's exactly.
Yeah.
I think my only issue with that is that, like on this picture here, the C is turned to the sideways, right? So that's not how you would see a C. I understand that, like in this picture, they're using it to wrap and all that type of stuff. But if you're gonna, my only opinion is that if you're going to, integrate the logo and the seal, I would like it to be the C in the correct orientation.
Well, if you did it that way, then it look like someone's getting the hook and being pulled out of the.
Well, it also goes backwards to why it is that the C ended up that way, right? So
Yeah, I
going
like
back to the presentation about the branding, right? It was this and it plays into all of it. So I wonder if maybe we can see a visual of that, see a little tweak of the seal with that C looking more similar to the branded C. And maybe that solves our, our issues with the path.
Okay, that's all the feedback I wanted.
I think Jackie does have a good point, that it could grow on you, and maybe it'll grow on me. So I'm willing to be patient with it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, good luck. We'll see you in a couple of months, and hopefully you've been able to extract something that somehow makes it on the page.
I mean, is there anything else you guys want to ask us to clarify? I mean, we did give you a lot of information.
No, I think it was pretty clear.
Okay.
Realistic mountains, consider the pathway, but maybe we want to keep the C. Maybe we play with it, but it is a cool hidden little item in there to have the branding in it. then incorporate a crown, because if we soften the mountains and change that, then where's the crown out? So we got to figure that out. That's the key. And then make the circle more prominent, maybe more realistic, redesign maybe the streets, or figure out a way to make this circle a little more identifiable the way that it's laid out. So that's what I heard.
Just because it's a specific design point, do we want to unstraighten Main Street in this, or keep Main Street
Not
straight?
Keep it straight. It should have never
Mayor, I'll leave it to you.
actually become a
It was a mistake
vote.
then, and it would be a mistake
I-
now.
It needs to be
I
straight.
100% agree with you. That was a mistake. However, most people weren't here, so won't recognize it. And I'm saying right now, people didn't even know what it was. As speaking as a person that loves the history, I'm saying is it from identifiable standpoint? No one. Most people said, "What's the target for?" Because it looks like a target. It's this.
No,
Well,
do
thumbs
not bend
works
that
for
straight.
me if you guys want
Do not keep it straight. So thumbs up for straight.
to.
But I think I can take what he's trying to get at is make it more identifiable as a cityscape, and that it's the circle with the city. So maybe there's a way to work the lines so
Sure.
it feels more like that.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But I would say too, we were looking at historic renderings, aerials, and the time period of those renderings, it was still straight, right? So
No,
they stay
I
true to the
get
history.
why you did
I mean,
it.
you should stay true to the history, right?
No, I totally see it. I'm telling
anyone-
you, I do. I appreciate it. Like I said, I had somebody ask me, "What's the target? What are you targeting?
Yeah.
What's the target?" I'm like, "Oh no, it's grand." And they're like, "Oh, where's the middle part?" I'm like, "Okay."
For sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, guys. So this meeting is going to be adjourned. Our next meeting will be right here at 6:30 PM. Thank you.